Mass was going as usual, until the priest suddenly fell silent, stepped down from the altar, and walked out through the back door. No one ever saw him again. But when the police began investigating, they realized he hadn't just left his congregation. He had left something behind in the church basement. Halberd Falls wasn't the kind of place where people disappeared. Nestled between gentle hills and slow-moving rivers, the town moved at the pace of morning fog. People left their doors unlocked, shopkeepers remembered birthdays, and every Sunday morning, the wooden pews of St. Bartholomew's Church filled with neighbors exchanging smiles and nods before falling quiet for the sermon. At the heart of it all was Father Joseph. He had come to Halberd Falls almost 15 years ago, a newcomer with soft eyes and silver-streaked hair who somehow felt like he'd always belonged. No one quite knew his full story. He said little of his past, but he listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with warmth, clarity, and a deep, measured voice that seemed to settle something in people's bones. Father Joseph had a routine, and everyone in town could have recited it. He opened the church at 6:45 every morning, rain or shine. He walked along Main Street once a week to greet shop owners, stopping at the diner for coffee with a splash of cream and exactly one sugar. And on Sundays, he would walk up the center aisle of St. Bartholomew's just as the bell rang, offering a small wave to the children and a familiar nod to the older congregants. That Sunday, the one no one would ever forget, began like any other. The air was crisp but bright. Birds chirped in the trees near the churchyard. Margaret Turner, who'd sung in the choir since high school, swore she'd never heard the organ sound sweeter. By 9:57 a.m., the church was full. Father Joseph stepped up to the pulpit at exactly 10 o'clock. He began with a passage from the Gospel of Luke, the one about the lost sheep. His tone was calm, as always, and the congregation settled into the rhythm they knew so well. And then, without warning, he paused mid-sentence. Not the kind of pause for effect, not a thoughtful hesitation. He stopped, looked out across the pews. His face was unreadable, not frightened, not surprised, just still. The silence stretched long enough for people to shift uncomfortably. A baby let out a soft cry, quickly hushed. Father Joseph glanced to the back of the church. Some thought at the stained glass window. Others swore it was at the far door, then closed his Bible slowly and deliberately. Without a word, he stepped down from the pulpit and walked down the side aisle. First, no one moved. Felt like part of the sermon. A dramatic choice, perhaps. But he didn't stop. He passed the last pew, opened the side door, and stepped into the morning light. The door shut behind him. A minute passed. Then another. Margaret cleared her throat and stood, peeking out the side window. Nothing. No sign of him on the path or in the courtyard beyond. Eventually, Deacon Harold made his way to the pulpit, looking bewildered. He mumbled a closing prayer, the first time in memory that a Sunday service had ended 20 minutes early. People left the church murmuring, glancing around, waiting for Father Joseph to return, to wave sheepishly and explain some sudden call or errand. But the hours passed, the afternoon waned, and by nightfall it became clear Father Joseph was gone. The town reacted first with confusion, then with concern, and finally with an unease that settled like fog and refused to lift. By Monday morning, word had spread beyond Halberd Falls. Father Joseph hadn't returned to the rectory. His room was untouched, his bed neatly made. His Bible lay on the desk next to a worn leather journal that he always kept closed. His car was still parked behind the church, keys on the hook beside the back door. Sheriff Emily Brenner had known Father Joseph for years. She remembered the night his cat went missing and how he walked the neighborhood with her flashlight, calling softly through the dark. She remembered the way he helped during the floods of 15, standing barefoot in muddy water, pulling sandbags with her deputies. She didn't believe for a second that he had left on his own. No wallet was missing, no packed bag. His phone, an old flip model he barely used, was on the charger, still full of missed calls and unopened messages. And then there was the footage. The church had one security camera inside, a quiet addition made years ago after a break-in at the donation box. It faced the hallway leading from the side door to the vestry and sacristy. A motion sensor triggered the recording. On Sunday morning, the camera clicked on at 10:21 a.m., just after Father Joseph stepped off the pulpit. The grainy black and white footage showed him passing through the hallway, pausing for a brief moment at the window, then exiting through the back door into the church garden. And then, 43 minutes later, the camera activated again. This time, the door creaked open. The hallway remained empty. No one came in. No one went out. But in the final 3 seconds of the footage, the lights flickered. Just once. That detail gnawed at Sheriff Brenner. By Tuesday, search parties had been organized. Volunteers combed the nearby woods, the riverbank, the hills behind the cemetery. Drones were brought in. Dogs. They found nothing. No torn fabric. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just silence. The town began to fray. Parishioners left candles on the church steps. Flowers. Handwritten notes. Some people whispered about burnout, a private breakdown. Others feared something darker, a targeted crime, a disappearance too perfect to be random. Then came the first strange visitor. A man in his 60s, wearing a long gray coat and round glasses, came to the church office asking to speak to Father Joseph. When told the priest had gone missing, the man grew quiet. Then he said something strange. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Sheriff Brenner, who happened to be there at the time, asked the man to explain. But he simply shook his head. "He knew it would find him eventually," he said, then turned and walked out before anyone could ask his name. The incident might have been dismissed as eccentric. Halberd Falls had its share of odd travelers. But 2 days later, the man returned. Only this time it wasn't to the church. It was to the sheriff's office. And he brought with him a photo, a black and white image, old but crisp. It showed a group of men standing on the steps of a seminary. In the back row, unmistakably, was Father Joseph. The photo was dated 1979, and written in faded ink on the back were just 2 words: St. Gallows. Sheriff Brenner sat in her office long after sunset, the photograph between her hands. She'd looked up St. Gallows in the state archives, only to come up empty. No such seminary was listed in public records. When she called the diocese headquarters in Portland, the line went silent at the mention of the name. "We haven't used that name in decades," said the voice on the other end, a hesitant male secretary. "Where did you hear it?" Emily hesitated, then lied. "It came up in a sermon recording." There was another pause. Then the man said something that stuck with her. If he remembered that place, then he may have remembered what happened there. The call ended abruptly. The deeper she dug, the stranger the trail became. There was no birth certificate for Father Joseph M. Lark. The church records listed his arrival in Halberd Falls in 1998, transferred from a parish in New Mexico. That parish had burned down in 1997. A small electrical fire, ruled accidental. But when she contacted local law enforcement there, no one remembered Joseph Lark. No files, no fingerprint records, no driver's license. It was as if he had stepped out of nowhere. Back at the rectory, Father Joseph's journal remained locked. It had no visible keyhole, just a worn leather flap held down by a brass latch. Emily had left it on her desk for days, staring at it as she sipped cold coffee. On Thursday evening, frustration got the better of her and she pried the latch open with a thin knife. Inside were not pages of prayer or confession. They were warnings. The entries were scattered across years, sometimes dated, sometimes not. Each one ended the same way. It followed me here. In one entry, dated 2004, a boy came to confession, said he saw someone standing in his room at night, thought it was me. I told him to pray, but the next morning he was gone. They found his shoes in the orchard. His parents moved a month later. Another, dated 2011. It waits near trees. It doesn't like light. It knocks twice, never 3 times. Once I answer, it gets closer. And finally, an undated note written in messy, rushed handwriting. This town is quiet, but I hear it again. 2 knocks at the door of the sacristy last night. No one was there. I won't answer next time. Emily closed the journal and sat motionless for a long time. She wasn't superstitious. She believed in facts. But something about the handwriting chilled her more than she wanted to admit. Friday morning brought a fresh development. A pair of hikers came into the station, visibly shaken. They had been camping near the old fire tower 10 miles outside town. Around 3 a.m., they heard what sounded like a church bell, faint but steady. It rang 13 times. They followed the sound, and it led them to a clearing where, they swore, they saw a man standing perfectly still among the trees. When they tried to call out, he didn't move. They turned on their flashlight and he was gone. Emily might have dismissed it, but one of them had taken a photo. Grainy and dark, but in the center of the frame, a shadowed figure in what looked like a cassock. She drove out that evening with Deputy Moore. The forest was quiet, still damp from last week's rain. Nothing out of the ordinary until they reached the clearing. There, at the edge, was something half buried in the dirt. Emily crouched down and brushed away the soil. A silver crucifix. Father Joseph's. The same one he wore every day, and the back was engraved with his initials. That evening, Sheriff Emily Brenner returned to the station with the crucifix in her coat pocket, cold and oddly heavier than she remembered them being. She laid it out on her desk beside Father Joseph's journal. Her office, usually a place of control and clarity, felt dimmer, even though the lights were on. She stared at the crucifix. Why leave it behind? If Joseph had walked away voluntarily, why discard something so personal? Deputy Moore knocked gently and entered without waiting. He held a stack of papers, old missing person reports from the surrounding counties. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping them on her desk. "I ran a search just out of curiosity. Look at the patterns." Emily flipped through the reports, her brow tightening. Young men, 2 to 3 per decade. Last seen walking near the Churchwoods. Most cases closed as runaway. Some never investigated at all. One from 1973 stood out. A 16-year-old altar boy named Daniel R. Collins. Last seen after helping the priest clean up after Mass. No one saw him leave. Same age range. Same area. Always at night. And something else. Every disappearance occurred the week before Easter. Every one. They brought in Father Moretti from the diocese to examine the journal and the crucifix. A cautious man in his 60s, he read through the pages slowly, shaking his head. "This is a deeply disturbed man," he said. "It's not demonic. It's trauma." Emily didn't agree. Father Joseph may have been eccentric, but paranoid hallucinations didn't leave physical evidence. They didn't steal people from clearings and drop crucifixes in the woods. That night, she returned to the church one more time. She walked the hall where Joseph had paused his sermon. The altar was undisturbed, the pews silent. She moved into the sacristy, then through the narrow hallway behind it. Her flashlight caught something at the edge of the far wall, a narrow panel slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Behind it, stairs leading downward. Stone steps, barely lit by the flicker of her flashlight. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, she found a stone room, perhaps once a wine cellar. Dust hung in the air, and in the center a wooden chair facing the wall. And behind it a door, not a proper one. A wooden frame covered in old nails and symbols carved deep into the surface. Crosses, circles, eyes. She reached for the handle, but before her hand touched it, something knocked. Once, then again, then silence. Her heart froze. She backed away slowly, gun drawn, but the door remained shut. She left, didn't speak to anyone that night, slept with her bedroom light on for the first time since childhood. The next morning, the knock came again, this time at her house. 2 soft taps on her front door at 3:12 a.m. By the time she rushed downstairs, weapon ready, no one was there. Just the sound of wind, and on the porch, Father Joseph's Bible, open to Exodus 20 verse 4. "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." The Bible left on Sheriff Emily Brenner's doorstep haunted her. She had no idea who had placed it there or how they knew where she lived. Only 2 people outside the department even knew about the case, and neither of them had access to the locked evidence room where the original Bible had been sealed. This was a different copy. Same wear, same faded edges. But inside the margins, handwritten notes now circled verses in red ink. Notes she hadn't seen before. "It watches from the rafters. Only the faithful can hear it. He was chosen, I was not." No name signed the notes, but one line near the end of Revelation had been underlined twice. "The prayers of the saints rise up like smoke before the throne." She brought the Bible back to the station. Deputy Moore, pale and visibly shaken, asked her the question she'd been avoiding all week. "Do you believe he's dead?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, "I'm going back." That night, she returned to the stone cellar beneath the church, alone. She brought backup, her flashlight, her service weapon, and her recorder. The symbols on the hidden door hadn't changed, but something in the air had, the temperature, the stillness. She knocked softly once. Nothing. She knocked again, and the door creaked open. Behind it was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Cold air poured out like breath from a cave. The passage twisted, leading downward at a slow but steady angle. The walls were damp stone, carved with more symbols, but now mixed with newer graffiti, initials, dates, scratches. And then a room, circular, hollowed out of earth. Candles lined the perimeter, most burned down to their bases. In the center stood a raised platform, a pulpit of stone, and beside it a single wooden bench. On that bench there was a man, thin, beard overgrown, his robe tattered but unmistakable. Father Joseph. Emily raised her weapon, voice trembling. Father Joseph? He looked up slowly. His eyes weren't wild, they were calm. Too calm. You came, he said. Where have you been? I never left, he answered. I've been listening. To what? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the far side of the chamber, to a wall of stone that looked like every other wall, except it pulsed. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, like breath. I didn't run, he said. I was taken, but I was allowed to remain, to understand. Understand what? She demanded. He looked at her with something between pity and awe. That some places aren't meant for sermons. They're meant for silence. That was when she saw the marks on his arms. Not injuries, not scars, but symbols. The same as the ones on the hidden door. Emily backed away, breathing hard. Her flashlight flickered. Behind her, the entrance groaned shut. She turned, but the path wasn't there. Father Joseph still sat, unmoving. They won't let you leave unless you leave something behind, he said. They took my voice. I was a preacher. It was a fair trade. Then silence. Complete. Emily couldn't even hear her own breathing.